We could not be more excited for this evening. Your presence here demonstrates that Black space is alive. It is not vacant. And our hope is that the things we share with each other will not just be about the portraits, but it'll be about deepening the connectivity that helps spaces like this and the people that occupy them do their thing more and more, better and better. So thank you really for being here. I wish there was like a sign-up list. Maybe there is. If you want to do things, sign up and join us. Amy Sherald happens to be one of the most enchanting people I know. And from our early meetings, I knew that great things were happening, even if they weren't always evident to others. And Amy, your constant rising is an encouragement and a salute to all Black artists, to all artists. And I just want to say thank you for being here, being so generous.
Thank you.
If we were talking a little bit about the strategy of art in life, I would say the creation of a book that shares with people beyond the course of an exhibition what an artist does, who they are, how they make, all the other nuanced things that are not evident in an exhibition. Those moments are very, very important. And so artists need writers, and artists should be writing, and writers need publishers who can help distribute. And so Christy Henry, who's director of the Princeton Press, is here with us, and I want to introduce her. Thank you so much, Christy.
Okay. First of all, I can't believe I have the honor of following this gentleman, and I'm completely humbled, and it's an inordinate privilege. Theaster, thank you. Thank you to the entire Rebuild team for giving us such an inspiring space to hold this book launch. We have had many muses, and the current location is one of them. We are here to celebrate people, partnerships, and yes, a book. There's a subtle messaging. If you didn't see it out front, please see it on the way back. Thank you, Theaster. Like the very best of portraiture, truly inspired publishing is dependent upon the artist and the muse, and we could not be more grateful, truly eternally grateful for the many muses for this book. Our partners at the Smithsonian National Portrait Gallery are incredible artists and authors who made this book possible. Our friends at the Seminary Co-Op, beloved friends who've helped bring everybody together tonight. And you all, you are people of ideas, people of community, we hope people of the book, but people who are committed and passionate. And so you are who we publish for, you are who we want to publish with. In the foreword to the book, Kim Sajet, the director of the NPG, who could not be here tonight owing to the beautiful Chicago weather, which I remember fondly, speaks about the power of art to bring people together, to spark critical conversations, and to change the world. This book celebrates that power, and as well, of course, it celebrates the kind of leadership that we need to change the world. So thank you all for joining us tonight. It is now my incredible honor to introduce Gwendolyn Du Bois Shaw, who is the Director of History, Research, and Scholarship and Senior Historian at the Smithsonian National Portrait Gallery.
So thank you so much for being here. When we were deciding to do the book launch, we wanted to do it here in Chicago, a city that is so important for the subjects of this book, and we wanted to do it right here. This was the first place that came to mind. This is time during College Art Association. We wanted to get people out of the Chicago Hilton and into the city, so thanks to all of our colleagues who came out tonight. There are 2 seats up at the front for older folks. If there are some older folks who maybe can't sit through the next 20 minutes, I want to invite you to come up to the front row. There are 2 seats. Thank you. Great. And one more. Here we go. Okay. Got to make sure everybody's comfortable. So, and it's such a pleasure for me to introduce the folks who are on stage here. You know, we're sorry that Kehinde could not be with us tonight, but we are very pleased to have Amy Sherald. Amy is the winner of our portrait competition, the Outwin Bootcheaver portrait competition, and was commissioned, of course, to do the magnificent portrait of Mrs. Michelle Obama that is on the cover of the book. And you'll notice when you buy the book that this is a book that has two covers. You can take off the cover and flip it around if you want to see her, and then maybe the next day you want to see him, you can flip it back the other way. And so you will delight in that. So thank you so much, Amy, for being here.
You're welcome.
And then, there we go. And my colleague, Rick Powell from Duke University. Rick is the John Spencer Bassett Professor of Art History. And we like to call him the dean, the dean of African American art history. Every time somebody says, well, we need an African American art history book or essay written, they say, let's go to Rick. So we were very, very pleased that Rick consented to write one of the essays for the catalog and to also be here tonight. Thank you so much, Rick. And then my two wonderful, lovely, amazing colleagues, Dorothy Moss, curator of painting and sculpture, and Taína Caragol, curator of painting and sculpture and Latino art history at the National Portrait Gallery. And Taína and Dorothy had the pleasure of being in large part the driving forces, between helping to decide how we would do the portrait commissions for these two portraits of President Barack Obama and Mrs. Michelle Obama. The Portrait Gallery has been commissioning portraits of presidents for a number of years, but not as long as people often imagine. We only started with George H.W. Bush. That was our first presidential portrait commission. And then we waited and went to Hillary Clinton. She was the second one. With the commission of Michelle Obama's portrait, that's really just the third. With Laura Bush, Hillary Clinton, and Michelle Obama. So this is something that's new, the portrait commission of a first lady. So I wanted to talk just a little bit about that history first of portrait commissions, but also portraits of presidents. So Rick, I was hoping you could kind of start us off with just a little bit of background, because I think people assume that portraits of these types are things that always happen. But with the Portrait Gallery, we've just been collecting them, since the 1960s and commissioning them really for about 20 years. So if you could talk about how this portrait of Barack Obama fits in with that legacy and start us out.
Well, thank you, Gwendolyn, and thanks everyone for being here. This is really an important occasion, and I'm honored to be amongst you. I was born at 60th and Cottage Grove, so it's nice to be back. So Gwendolyn has asked me to talk about. Gwendolyn has asked me to talk about portraiture and presidential portraiture. And I want to start with not so much presidential portraiture, but the idea of grand manner portraiture. So in other words, we're in another zone when we talk about grand manner portraiture. These are big portraits. These are quite dramatic and theatrical portraits. I'm thinking of images that were created starting, I would say, in the late 18th century with people like Joshua Reynolds, who's doing pictures of generals and queens and courtiers. And these are big pictures that have elaborate frames and often show their subjects in windswept landscapes or on horseback and the like. So our presidential portraits in the United States pretty much are looking to that European tradition and have looked at that European tradition for some time. Of course, beginning with George Washington's portrait and continuing all the way up into the present until the Portrait Gallery had the vision to incorporate into that history Amy and Kehinde. And what we see when we look at those works, I would say, on one hand, continues that grand manner tradition, but as we often do, we raise the ante on that. We reimagine that. We tweak that. And as we'll hear this evening, we're going to hear about how one takes on something as momentous as a president's portrait, a first lady's portrait, which often subscribes to a certain kind of protocol in terms of comportment, in terms of gestures, in terms of clothing, in terms of background and what have you. And so what we're going to hear tonight, I'm sure, is that we're gonna learn that you can go beyond that Western tradition. You can incorporate something that has to do with what it means to be a remarkable and special and extraordinary African-American woman and man in the 21st century, and what it means to have your picture done within that framework. So, did I answer your question?
That's great. And that, I mean, that's a great way to move to Amy and say, you know, confronted with that history and with this task and having a few examples, maybe, you know, to consider would be hanging near your work eventually. How did you begin to approach the commission and think about how to image this woman who means so much to so many and has been so visible to us for so long, and then, you know, was entering this moment, I think, of nostalgia for a lot of folks?
Yeah, people were in mourning already, you know,
Mourning,
when I started
grief.
the portrait. But after I got off the phone call with Dorothy and Kim when they told me I had received the commission, honestly, the first thing I did was go online and look at like the thousands of photographs that we have of her online. And in that moment, I knew that I wanted to really engage the power of portraiture and offer the public up something that was more intimate and more nuanced to who she really was as a woman. I think she has a very public self that we all adore. She's very engaging. But I think inside there's a woman that we don't necessarily get to see, that maybe only Barack or her family gets to see, but I wanted to kind of catch a glimpse of that, if I could, a more serious, dignified, self-satisfied, you know, woman.
Yeah, and so Dorothy, you coordinated between Amy and Mrs. Obama, and what was that like? How did the process start?
I think it's appropriate that today is Galentine's Day because those two are Galentines. I mean, they had such an unbelievable connection, and Amy talked to me about that when she went in for her interview, and you know, she felt this connection. Michelle Obama talked about how she felt about Amy at the unveiling. The transcript is in the book. I mean, I got to see it, and that was pure magic. And as an art historian and a curator, I've never really ever, and I'll probably never again be able to see an iconic painting come into being, but it started with this magical connection between two women and a trust that was palpable. When I walked into the garden where they were doing their second sitting, Mrs. Obama, reached her arm around Amy and embraced her, and from that moment on, I just watched this beautiful relationship. Amy moved her dress around, moved her hair around, moved her hand from a fist to a relaxed gesture, and it was beautiful to watch that. I mean, that's why that portrait speaks to us, I think, because that connection comes through, that deep, deep connection.
Well, the connection between an artist and the sitter, you know, the relationship that's built there is something that's really unique. And if it clicks, right, if there's that mutual respect and understanding, and not only a shared vision, but a faith and you know, a confidence that you will be respected, you know, in that process on both sides. Right.
Well, it felt vulnerable for me, and I know it felt there was a level of vulnerability for her. For me, I think the most awkward part was when I started painting. The painting starts inside of the viewfinder, and then I have to stare out at the person, and I go back into the camera, and so I had to look her into her eyes for about 2 minutes straight. And it's like, you know, we held each other's gaze, but I think the natural reaction is to always look away, but I'm just trying to like feel her spirit in that moment. And so that was probably the most traumatic part of the whole thing. Was like that awkward silence when you're trying to stare at it. I don't feel intimidated when it's like one of my, regular models, but because it was her, I'm like, I'm staring into her eyes. She's staring into my eyes.
Well, and that familiarity, like the natural inclination to say Michelle and Barack, because there's such an affection that I think so many people have, but very few people actually have, a personal relationship that gets to develop. And so, Taína, I'm curious if you saw that.
I saw that
happening.
too. Yeah, I was present at the two sittings that the former president, had with Kehinde Wiley, and yes, I witnessed Kehinde arranging the president's legs and asking him to pose like this or like that, trying on different poses, sitting down, standing up, with books, without books, and. There was a certain playfulness. There was a lot of affinity between both of them, and a lot of mutual respect. It was just a beautiful sight, because you could see the trust at play there.
And I was just going to add, it speaks volumes that President Obama and First Lady Michelle Obama chose Kehinde and Amy. Because what it says is that not only did they want really, really accomplished, amazing portraits, but they also wanted important works of contemporary art. Because these two artists are highly respected and important in the contemporary art world. And that's different than just a portrait. Now we're talking about objects that are going to have this kind of shelf life that has to do with art history and a larger kind of world of how we look at the figure in contemporary art. And so I think that was really profound for that choice to be made.
It's so interesting. Like after little Parker went viral, looking at Amy's portrait of Mrs. Obama, and Mrs. Obama invited Parker to their house in Kalorama in D.C. There's a little dance party video that Mrs. Obama posted on Instagram, and you could see in the background some Theaster Gates and some Kerry James Marshall works, and this is a family that has made a very strong commitment to collecting contemporary African American art, not just putting it up in the White House while they were occupants there, but purchasing it and bringing it home and putting it up, and so wanting to, connect fully that legacy, I think, is really important. So I heard there were some funny things that happened, though, at some of those sittings. I heard there were some mosquitoes that got in the way.
I knew I wanted to photograph her outside, and we had to find this secret place. Is my microphone on? We had to find a secret place that she could indiscreetly make her way into an outdoor area without anybody seeing. So if you're ever in DC, you probably walk past this house a million times and you'll never know, but I can't tell you. That day it had rained the day before. And they were, those little white mosquitoes that fly around in balls, and you just happen to walk through them, and you're like, that kept following us around the yard. And so between Dorothy, Carl, her makeup artist, and Meredith, her stylist, they were all standing there, just trying to keep the gnats away so that I could get a good photograph. But that was in the second session, and I honestly knew that I had captured the photograph that was going to be the portrait during the first session. But I let that little voice tell me, it may not be good enough. So then I was like, well, Kehinde's going to photograph the president for a second time, so I'm going to take this opportunity to do it for a second time. But I ended up going with that first image that my gut told me was the right one.
So, and it's an image of her in this amazing dress, right? This dress is a very special dress designed by Michelle Smith, the designer who was behind the brand Millie. For a long time, and it's a dress that has a number of kind of meanings to it. And so Mrs. Obama chose the dress specifically, but it also has visual components to it.
It's the reason why I was drawn to it. We started with 11 dresses.
11?
Yeah. Meredith sent me 11 dresses over text. Well, she sent me one. We were trying to figure out what we wanted. So she sent me one that was a digital print, and I'm like, I'll go blind if I try to paint this. I want pattern, but I don't want that much pattern, So she's like, okay, I get it. So she sent me several dresses like right off the runway for that season. And we had a conversation about, whether we wanted to go towards the evening gown look or more like casual. So Michelle was like something casual, obviously with her arms out. And right.
Those arms.
Yeah, that was important. So we narrowed it down to 4, and we had prototypes made, and she tried them all on, sent me pictures over the cell phone, and then I narrowed it down to 2. And one was kind of Michelle the first 4 years, where she wore a lot of like A-line skirts and white belts and things like that. It had a floral print. Her arms were still out. It was really feminine. There were just roses on the dress. And the second one was the one that you see with the geometric patterns. And that's the one she showed up in. So I kind of like organically let it happen. But when I was looking at her in the dress as she was coming downstairs to be photographed in the yard, I was like, this is going to be the one. So I didn't even photograph her in the second dress because I realized in that moment, I had already thought about the G-spin quilts, but I'm like, the dress needs to be a painting in itself. Like every single part of this painting needs to have a meaning and not just like a random pattern or something floral. And the poplin, the material that the dress is made of, kind of stands up on its own, almost like a house, or she's sitting on top of a mountain or a pyramid, statuesque. So it all kind of worked out in that moment, and I was able to connect her to Black history in a way that wasn't didactic, because I was really worried about, first I was worried about Black Twitter, because I was like, if Black Twitter don't like it, then we in real trouble. But secondly, I was worried about the crazy people that, so I'm like, if she's like this, then they're gonna think it's a Black power fist, you know what I mean? So all of her fingers, that was like 5 minutes, like, okay, put this one up, this one down, like trying to figure out something soft, but that looked natural. And it just kind of worked out, it fell into place, but it all came together.
Yeah, well, the pattern of the dress that's on there, which references, Black needlework, and you mentioned the Gee's Bend quilting tradition. It's such an interesting garment. And I'm just going to put a little plug in there because in November we're going to open an exhibition at the National Portrait Gallery that focuses on first ladies and portraits of first ladies, and I'm very pleased that she has agreed to lend the dress.
Oh, she
So if you come, you will get to see the dress, which never went into production. Once it was chosen for the portrait, it was pulled from production by Millie so that it would be special, because she didn't need everybody going around in that dress.
No.
However, all these little girls.
I know, that was about to
right?
say, I'm like, there's probably 500 little girls that have the same dress. And there's this woman, I don't know her real name, but her Instagram is like Magnolia Children's Clothing, and she makes these dresses for these little girls. So I had one little girl show up at my talk with the dress on, and they're tagging me all the time. And I honestly want to have like a huge group photograph of all these little girls in that dress all at one time.
Well, I love the little girls in the dress, but I really love, do you want to talk about that one, Dorothy? There was an Instagram of a little girl dressed as Amy.
For Halloween.
Holding the picture.
Yep.
And she had some glasses
She had on
and a
white
gray
glasses.
suit. And it made me cry, because I think one of the most important things, for me as an African American woman, as a historian of African American, is to think about not just little girls wanting to grow up and be first ladies, but wanting to grow up and be cultural producers and to be artists and to be visionaries. And that did it.
Yep.
Well, and I'll say, I've watched Amy carry out that message for way before she painted the First Lady. And I'll never forget a moment when we were in the gallery and she had just given a talk about her painting Miss Everything, Unsuppressed Deliverance, which won first prize in the Outland Buchever Portrait Competition in 2016. And a group of little girls came up to her, about 4 African-American girls who were in middle school, and they looked at Amy, and one said, "Why did you paint this portrait?" And Amy bent down and got tears in her eyes, and I collected myself and was able to take a picture of this moment. And Amy said, "I painted it for you so that when you go into a museum, you'll see someone who looks like you on the walls."
I know. It still makes me cry.
So Taína, at those sittings with President Obama and Kehinde Wiley, these are some big personalities, right? And some big personalities, and even though it was, a very, a sense of cooperation and coordination and all of that, were there any funny things that happened, or unexpected moments, or requests that were made? Do this, don't do that.
Yeah, all of that. Actually, a funny thing that happened was that a few days before the first sitting, the assistant of Kehinde Wiley called us at the portrait gallery and asked if I could bring an old-looking chair, an antique-looking chair, to the sitting. And so I was like, sure, an antique-looking chair. And I went all through our office space. We had at that moment maybe 55, 65 people working at the portrait gallery. And I couldn't find an antique-looking chair. Every chair was modern, like Danish sort of, or really, really contemporary. But actually, our previous senior historian, David Ward, had just retired, and I remembered that in his old office there were two antique-looking chairs with arms and leather. And so it was my task, and I brought with me the registrar to take that chair to the place where Obama sat for his portrait. The federal government and the Smithsonian, as a place that receives a lot of funding from there, is very particular about the kind of Uber that you can take or you cannot take, right? So we go for the cheap option. But that day, because I had to carry a chair that was quite heavy, I was allowed to take the more expensive option.
Uber Black.
Yes. And so we carried the chair in and out, and the chair suddenly had this aura. The chair had been at the sitting. Obama had sat on the chair, and our chair was probably going to make it into the portrait. And I was like, wow. However, as the portrait evolved, I understand that there was a conversation between the former president and Kehinde Wiley, and they decided to work, to sort of use the basis of our chair, but adorn it with just include some ornament there and make it into a composite, antique-looking chair that doesn't look like our chair anymore, but. And in terms of interesting exchanges, I think something that was really wonderful to witness was this conversation that occurred early on at the first sitting. I totally agree with Rick in just the extraordinary choice that the Obamas made by choosing Kehinde Wiley and Amy Sherald. And Dorothy, our chief curator, Brandon Fortune, and myself we had proposed something like 15 artists from different generations, different backgrounds, different styles. And it was absolutely remarkable that they chose Kehinde and Amy, because they knew that these were artists who were grounded in the tradition of portraiture, but adding their own spin, intervening that tradition, really, conceptually, to say something new and to make present African American people and people of color. And so, however, you're all familiar with Kehinde Wiley's style. He made a name as an artist by empowering people in very visible ways in his paintings, by bestowing on people all the symbols of power existing in old master European portraiture. And so the president knew that, and I think the president and Mrs. Obama are people who are incredibly very knowledgeable about art and very aware of the symbolic power it has, really. And I heard when the president said, well, you need to do something different for me. I cannot have a sword, really, like, no horse, thank you. And it was immediately clear that Kehinde had already thought about that too. It was the president who said it, but and who broached the topic. But Kehinde Wiley was like, absolutely, this is going to be a different kind of portrait. And so that was a fascinating moment to see.
Yeah, well, and they are such different portraits. And when there was the unveiling, there was so much press. That they even called me on the phone and asked for my opinion. I'm like, okay, I have an opinion. This is great. And so did everybody else on social media. You talk about Black Twitter, Amy, right?
No.
Everybody had an opinion.
They came for me. They came for me.
Everybody had an opinion. And then everybody wanted to come and see the portraits, right? So in the first year, our attendance at the Portrait Gallery went from about 1.3 million to 2.3 million. 1 million people came to see these portraits. And the lines are still there. They like on special days, they're very long. People want to see them, and they always ask, where are they? And then we get criticism about other things like why you got Andrew Jackson up in 4 different places. But they never argue. They never complain. They never complain. People are so happy. And when Toni Morrison passed away, this summer, I was in the galleries, and her portrait was hanging just a couple of feet away from Mrs. Obama's portrait. And people would come up to Mrs. Obama's portrait, and they would take a selfie, or they would have a friend take a picture, and they'd be all smiling. And then they would turn to Toni Morrison's. And for many of the African American women and girls that I watched, it was a really significant moment, both of joy and pride and pleasure, and then pain, and all of these personal connections. And so part of it is the individual portraits, part of it is the proximity and the company that they have.
Yeah, it's the blackest room at the Smithsonian. There's LL Cool J, Michelle, Tony.
It's quite a gallery.
It's the blackest room at the Smithsonian.
It's quite a gallery. So I'm curious, Rick, and I'm going to let Rick have the last word here, and then we're going to have a little bit of Q&A. But Rick, what is the future? What is the future now that we have these two amazing portraits? What is the future for presidential and first lady portraiture? But also, because, listen, y'all, this is my job. So give me some advice, because it's coming next. The three of us over here on the ends, we have to make this work. But what do you think the future is, not just for this kind of portraiture, but also for portraiture in general? Do you think this is a revival of painted portraits of, of living people? Are all of y'all going to go out and commission a portrait? I hope so. What do you think the future is?
Well, Gwendolyn, it's funny you should ask me that question, because I believe on Sunday there's going to be an article in the New York Times about Jordan Castile. Another very important portraitist. And I got this question, the same question you asked, from the reporter. And I had to underscore to the reporter that there is actually a long and distinguished tradition of black portraitists that goes back to the 19th century. That particularly during the Harlem Renaissance, we had people like Laura Wheeler Waring. And when we move into the 30s and 40s, fantastic people like William H. Johnson, Charles White, right here from Chicago. And at this moment, 2020, there is a whole cadre of extraordinary people doing figurative art, if not portraiture, particularly black figurative art, black portraiture. So this is an interesting moment that we're in right now. And one of the things that I've been thinking about is that we also are the beneficiaries in 2020 of the digital camera and also the selfie. And so it's easy to get your picture done on the moment, on the spot. And the digital camera allows a whole range of images to be done. And I find it fascinating that with the proliferation of the camera, people are now discovering the power and the beauty and the majesty of the painted portrait, thanks to Amy and thanks to Kehinde. And I envision a kind of a new life for painted portraiture. through these works as we move further into the 20th century, particularly in interesting and provocative ways of representing our people, with our sartorial style, and not just the portrait that does likeness, but the portrait that does something inside, that captures the inside of someone, their spiritual kind of self-representation.
Well, amen. Thank you. That's great. Well, I want to open it up to questions. I'm happy. You have a microphone over there with two? Okay, great. So if you can raise your hand and wait for the microphone to come to you, because I have to say I'm a little bit deaf.
This question is for Amy. When you mentioned that Black Twitter came for you, what was your process in like your initial reaction and then like your recognition of where it came from and then your resolution of it? Because
Reaction
they finally
to-
recognized. When you said Black Twitter came for you
well,
once
no,
they saw the...
Instagram. I'm not
Okay.
even on Twitter for that reason. No, I'm kidding. Well, you know, I feel like anything that comes along with something that's very public, it's gonna bring along some criticism. So I was ready for it. I thought I was ready for it, but for like 48 hours, I was like, my feelings are hurt. You know what I mean? But it's like, these people are crazy. So, so I really didn't pay it any mind. And, you know, I took a lot of opportunity when I had time to respond to some of the emails, because a lot of people just had not engaged with art at all. And they're like, we had a first lady who was a Black woman, and she should have Black skin. And for me, I think that when you see brown skin, it tends to codify something immediately. You know what I'm saying? So through the gray, you're almost allowed to look past that into the real person. And it just took some people getting used to. You know, some people like their poetry to rhyme, some people don't. And so I was like, you don't like it to rhyme, that's fine. You know, it's cool. But I mean, and a lot of people were like, I don't like it. And then they went to go see it, and they would email me back and say it made me cry. Because it has a visual effect in person that it does not carry on Instagram. So yeah, it was cool. It was cool.
And if you have not been to Washington, D.C. to see the portrait, that's okay, because it is coming to a city near you.
Your city.
The city you are in 2022? 2021. Thank you, Reese. And I need to say a big thank you and a big ups to Reese Conlon, who is the editor of this book. Hallelujah. Thank you, Reese. And in 2021, we're touring the portraits across the country. They're going to start here at the Art Institute of Chicago. And they will begin here because it will be President Obama's 60th birthday. Wow. Well, they are up, and we feel this is a very special, important thing to do. They'll also go to Los Angeles, to Dallas, to the High Museum in Atlanta, and to Brooklyn. So they will be all across America, and we're working really hard to secure corporate partner sponsorship, so they will be free, regardless of where they are displayed. Something very important to us.
Good evening. I wanted to speak on Amy's rendering of First Lady Obama. I got, as an art writer and art historian here, I got tons and tons and tons of messages, and I had your back. I just wanted to let you know that. But one of the most important things about the portrait was what you did with this image in the sense of elevation. Because she was the first Black, first African-American, First Lady, we saw photographs of her ad nauseum, and it created less of a distance between us and the presidency, probably more so than any other president and First Lady. So many of us felt we knew her, or we had access to her. And then some people were so familiar that they would say horrible phrases, such as an ape in heels, or terrible derogatory terms against skin color, facial features, hair, body shape. But what you did was you completely took her out of this element of realism. And with the skin tone, with the monumental sizing, you created a deity. So whoever the person is, they have to look up, They have to look around, and they're not looking at anything that's particularly human because it's an idea that's above it. And I wanted to thank you for that and for creating that within the image of the Black woman and taking it out of a place where anyone could criticize or ridicule because it's so above that. And I think it was above most people's understanding at the time, but I think by now we all get it. So thank you so much.
Thank you. I just want to say, you know, I said I got some emails, but I got several emails from like Midwestern white men who were Trump supporters who introduced themselves that way, and they said, saw your segment on CBS Sunday Morning Show, just want you to know I'm a fan of you and your work and the painting, which I thought was really cool. So it really did transcend the spirits of many.
Amy,
how about you shout it out up there?
All right. So Mrs. Obama selected, or somebody selected 11 dresses for Mrs. Obama. How many outfits for Mr. President Obama?
Taína.
Well, you know the others, right? Like men have it so easy. Just, it's a very simple choice for them. So.
Well, he couldn't do a tan suit, right? The tan suit was not an option.
No white linen summary suit either. But no, but there was, I will say that that President Obama posed with his jacket on, without his jacket on, without his jacket, with a tie, without a tie, with his sleeves rolled, unrolled. And so the result is what you see in that magnificent painting.
So I went to MICA, and I'm just curious if there's an opportunity for there to be a space like this in some of the communities in Baltimore. Like I think about like from Greenwood to Broadway in particular on North Avenue, and there's great things going on. Blacks and Wax Museum, there's the compound.
Yeah.
What would you suggest people think about in Baltimore? And
Well,
can something like this exist?
My dream has always been an intergenerational community center because there's something beautiful about having the youth. And, my mom is sitting right here. I'm not going to tell her age. But when I try to get her to hang out with people her age, she doesn't want to. Because she's like, I want to be around somebody young. So I think that would be something that I would try to bring to fruition. I've thought about so many things, to be honest. I mean, kind of an art school. I feel like, in my opinion, like having lived and worked in Baltimore and like worked on murals and things like that, I often started to feel like murals were things that people gave other people when they really don't want to give them anything at all. Yeah. And so I became very wary of like their intentions when it came to art. And I feel like there's that art is great, but there's some other things that need to happen first before we can get there, because it's just a salve. It doesn't solve any real problems. So for me, having worked in Baltimore City Jail, some kind of re-entry program. I thought about opening up a dairy farm that's like out in Baltimore County so that when they get out of prison, they can get out of the city. Because I've had guys that I work with that like did great for a year and they regress because they had a moment of, something didn't go right and they just don't know how to work from that, So, but I do have plans, just know that. I'm not sure, but I do have plans. And the Theaster has always been somebody that I've aspired to think like and to be as generous as with my success. So I admire you for that.
Can you bring the mic to back there?
So I'm from Washington, D.C., and there's a big history of art, cultural production tied to Howard, and then you come to Chicago, you see the same thing throughout the South Side and connections with places like this. But I remember when I first came to Chicago to start doing my my schoolwork, I moved in with my roommate who's from Southern California, and I bought a portrait of, I bought a Jacob Lawrence picture, and his first reaction, he's a first generation African. He asked, well, why'd you buy that picture? Why are you going to put that on our wall? And I remember being frustrated. He didn't understand or appreciate that. But I'm stepping back and I realized I've been taking for granted the fact that art was constantly ready for me, for people in my family who live near cities. So what's the responsibility, the role for those of us tied to Chicago, those of us tied to Howard who have access to this stuff, to bring it out to places where that privilege and opportunity isn't given? Because I hear talk constantly about how we should go and move forward, we should spread art, but what's the actual concrete roles that we can start taking, especially now that you mentioned the digital media going and spreading this? What can we concretely do now to go and kind of bring that exposure more?
Who's that question for? Who's that question for?
Oh, it's Brian.
Okay.
Do either of you want to talk about something?
I had a hard time hearing it, so I'm not even sure how to answer yet.
Well, I think this is a really big, it's a really important question, particularly for museums, right? Because one of the things that museums tend to do is we imagine you have to come to us, right? And that's not always possible for everybody. Folks don't always have time. One of the things that we did when we reopened the Portrait Gallery in 2007 was we radically changed the hours so that we're open from 11:30 in the morning till 7 at night. And we've actually really become a community museum so that people come after work and they spend time. And we have a lot of family programs, and we also have a lot of programs for people who are learning to speak English, where they speak about portraits. We have a group that meets every week. But there are lots of great museums that bring works out into the community really actively. One of the things that we're working on right now at Portrait Gallery is with the Martin Luther King Jr. Public Library, which is directly across the street from our building, and which is Mies van der Rohe building, which is being renovated right now and rethought as a different kind of an art space and a maker space, and a space where people can, do all of these different things, because libraries have really become these social service centers, and they're more than just, places to read. And I think that that's one of the things that museums can continue to do, is to partner with other institutions. I know I have great colleagues at the Barnes Foundation, for example, at Philadelphia, where they go into housing projects and they go into prisons, and they bring a collection, thoughts from the collection out into the community. And I think that we have to, support these institutions, and we have to participate in them. I always talk to folks about joining the institutions that they admire and joining at a higher level. If you have those resources, so that you can also have a voice. Because people, they hear you talk a lot, but if you don't have any skin in the game, they don't listen as closely. So I think, there are lots of different things that people can do. But the first thing is what you just asked, right? Is you have to say, what can I do? How can I participate? And you do that with the places that you want to be involved in, and then find out what other places they know about that also need help and need energy. So there's one in the back there, in the way back.
My question is for Amy. It's a very little question, but it's such a big, big question. Did you know from the get-go that you were going to use that dreamy blue? Because everybody talks about the dress and the hand pose, but for me, part of that painting is actually the color. And I wondered why you chose that color.
I think I knew it was going to be the color, but I made myself try different colors. But something about that. So I have a painting in my studio right now, and something about her face and about the energy of the work made me change the background color to something that was really light, because something about her face made me made me feel as if she needed to feel like she had some space behind her, that she just wasn't like smacked up against a wall or something like that. And so that blue, it took me like a few hours to mix that blue because I saw it in my mind, but I had to figure out how to get there. But something about that is, it's heavenly, or celestial, or, it's almost like it's invisible. Like the color is there, but it's still invisible, or you still feel like you can reach through it. And I think that's why I settled on that color. It was just the right color. And I knew blue, it just worked. I knew blue, but I was like, maybe not blue, because, people know me for color. And the dress was already white, so there was already a lot of coolness happening. But that's why I choose it, because she needed to be in open air almost.
So we have time for one more question.
I saw your hands.
Wait.
Hi, Amy. Thank you so much, and thank you to all the panelists. This is historic. I'm very happy to be here. But I wanted to piggyback on your question, and I wanted to ask you if you could talk a little bit about limited palette and why that is so prominent in your practice. And I don't want to say anymore. I just want to hear you talk about limiting your palette, the decisions that you make, the decisions that you make to include color and by omitting. Just wanted to hear your thoughts.
In general, or just for that painting?
In general, and then how that kind of got ratcheted up for this particular project. Because I know that when you get so minimal, you have to make very specific decisions, which you've been alluding to this entire evening. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about that. Thank you.
The way I work is different for every single painting. And I have my favorite colors that I have to, push myself to get out of, because I'm not really drawn to like primary colors at all for some reason. But there are times when they're necessary, when the boldness of that color is necessary and the psychology of those colors are necessary. And there are times when they need to pull back. Part of developing the palette of the painting is when I'm looking for the clothes that the sitter is going to wear. And I see some things, I like tertiary colors, or colors that, you don't exactly see all of the time. I think it makes it more interesting. But it's really what they're wearing that controls the decisions that I make. And so I make the background color choice first. And then from there, I just kind of build on that. But there's a balance or a symmetry to the symphony of like how they all have to work together. So like right now I'm working on one painting that's only 3 colors. And I'm working on another one that's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 colors. But it really all had to do with what each model was wearing, if that helps, yeah.
Well, I want to thank you all for coming. I want to thank the Astor Gates and everybody here for hosting us. I think there's a bar back there, right? There's a bar back there. And there are books that have signatures in them if you want a very special book. And remember, you can flip the cover. And it's all kinds of good stuff. And come and visit us in Washington. But definitely when the portraits come here to Chicago, come out and show your love.
Thank you.